My name is Tony Schonk. I'm an amateur astronomer. I'm a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, Halifax chapter, and an instructor at the Seniors College of Nova Scotia. This is part of a series of videos where I'm looking at the overall observing system and talking about the various components and telling you basically what to buy, what not to buy, or consider not buying, and explaining how these can be used. Previous video or videos has covered tripods and mounts, and this video will discuss telescopes. When you first go to look for a telescope, if you're a first-time buyer, the usual place is to go to a department store. And department stores tend to have telescopes starting at, let's say, a couple $100 up to $400 or $500. And the most common type of telescope that would come with those systems is either a refractor like this or a Newtonian, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So let's start talking about refractors. Now, not all refractors are the same. However, they basically have a lens at the front which slowly focuses the light back here, diagonal back here, which then bends the light back up to this eyepiece here. So if we start at the front here, the components, what you have here is a dew shield. Because as dew forms, if it forms on your lens up here, you're not going to see very much. And a dew shield helps that. Doesn't solve the problem totally, but it helps. So most refractors come with a dew shield. Then you have your objective lens up here, and we have this long tube. This is how we focus it, and there's a mirror in here which bends the light up into here, and you have an eyepiece. So you can have different eyepieces that you put into here, and that creates different degrees of magnification. But we'll talk more about that later. This one comes with a little viewfinder here to help you actually locate the object in the sky. So this is your basic refractor telescope. It's referred to as a Keplerian because the astronomer Kepler is accredited with the design of it. Now, this whole system came together, and I've already talked about the shortcomings of the tripod and the mount. But you know, the optics aren't bad on this. Now, the standard Keplerian telescope suffers from chromatic aberration or fringing. So you'll have blue on one side and reddish fringing on the other side. But that's why this telescope is so long, to minimize the effect of chromatic aberration. And this will give you pretty good views. It's pretty good for viewing the moon and the planets and deep sky objects, double stars, and that sort of thing. So it's not a bad optical tube. However, the rest of it, not so great. Now, in order to remove chromatic aberration, they added another piece of glass to the refractor telescope, which brought the red and the blue light together at the same focus point and greatly reduced fringing, not entirely eliminating it, but greatly reducing it. And that meant they no longer needed to have a very long telescope in order to reduce fringing. And they could create a relatively short tube telescope, such as this. So the previous one was a 70 millimeter telescope, Keplerian telescope, and this is an 80 millimeter achromatic. Now it has the same characteristics as the other one. It has a dew shield, and here is the objective lens, and the light comes out, path comes out here, hits the diagonal, and goes into the eyepiece as before. Now the difference here is the previous telescope was 900 millimeters long, but this one's only 400 millimeters long. It's very light, only weighs a couple of pounds, so it makes an excellent travel scope. And the viewing through here is less fringed, and it's also a little bit more light than the other telescope coming in. So this is a great thing to take with you. Rather than a finder scope, I've attached a red dot finder here, but you can put a finder scope on here as well. I'll talk more about these later. And There you go. The only problem with these is with the very short focal length, it's difficult to achieve high magnification given your set of eyepieces. So this is a typical 25mm eyepiece I have put in here. With a 400mm focal length, that is a magnification of 16. That'll give you nice wide fields of view, which is what you want sometimes when you're looking at the night sky. But if you're trying to look at detail on the moon or the planets, this is not the telescope to use for that. After the achromatic refractor, the next step up is what's called an ED refractor. Now, ED stands for extra low dispersion. It helps pretty well get rid of fringing. As a consequence, the views through this are quite a bit better than the views through the other one. They're both 80mm refractors, and this would be more than double the price of the other one. However, if you want to get into astro imaging or taking pictures through telescopes, then this is where you want to start. There are much more expensive refractors, generally referred to as APOs, and they again could be 2 to 3 times the cost of this telescope. However, we won't go there. It has rings to hold it in place so you can attach it to a mount. And just for interest's sake, the rings tend to come with these attachments here, so you can attach a camera to the top of it, and while you can use your system to take astro images, tracking the night sky, and observe what you're photographing at the same time. So my relatively small German equatorial mount that is actually relatively sturdy, a sturdy tripod. It's not the really big ones, like 2 inches thick. And this relative lightweight telescope are excellent for traveling, excellent to get into viewing the night sky and doing astro imaging if you're interested in that. So this package here is a good starter kit. I say starter. I still use it today, even though I have much more expensive and heavier weight mounts and tripods, because, well, frankly speaking, once it's set up correctly, it's a good system for taking wide field photos of the night sky. The next kind of telescope I want to talk about is a Newtonian. Now this is a Newtonian. It has a focal length of 1200 millimeters and a diameter of 150 millimeters, or generally referred to as a 6-inch telescope. Now, the first thing you'll notice about Newtonians is they tend to have very long tubes. And the second hint is that the eyepiece is at the top of the tube. So what happens is the light enters here, and I don't know if you can see that, but there's a large mirror at the bottom. The light is focused when it hits the large mirror back to a secondary mirror, which is this mirror at the front. And that reflects the light back up into the eyepiece here, where you can see it. So it's about 0.6 meters from there to there, and then back again. And so this has a nice long focal length, which is good for viewing the moon or planets and deep sky objects. One of the advantages of this is that it has no chromatic aberration, because there's no lenses involved except, of course, for the eyepiece. And so that's an advantage of this. The second thing is you can see that compared to the refractors that I showed you earlier, this is a very wide opening. So these are often referred to as light buckets because they're relatively inexpensive to make compared to a refractor. So you get more bang for your buck when you buy a Newtonian telescope. There are a couple of other factors to consider. One is, when you look at the back here, what you see is several screws. And on the larger Newtonians, you can actually turn them by hand. You don't need a screwdriver. And what they do is they adjust the angle of the mirror slightly. Because as you're moving it about, if you move it about and bang it up or over constant use and through temperature changes, the mirror gets slightly out of alignment. And so what you need to do is collimate the mirror. Now, that's not a terribly difficult process, and I usually end up doing it once every 3 or 4 times I use the mirror. But I usually check it on a regular basis, and that's a simple process. You can buy one of these. This is a manual one. They come with a laser system as well, but I find this works just fine. And you plump that in there. The light comes in here, and you look through a tiny hole here, and there's a little circle that's imprinted on the mirror, and you make sure that a dot that's here lines up with the circle here, and then you know you're all aligned. If it is not aligned, then you have to turn some of these screws here to readjust the position of the mirror. And that takes a little bit of practice, but it's really not that difficult. So if you buy one of these, you should buy a collimator like this to make sure your optics are all aligned and you're seeing things as you should. Of course, you can attach your finder scope over here, and at least I think I can. There we go. And they've got a handy little handle here for this one because it's a push tube, and away you go. So in terms of investment, these are excellent. Well, there's another slight problem with them. This one, as I showed you earlier, is designed to go with a Dobsonian mount. Let me get another one. So here we have another Newtonian, and when I first received it, it came on this fork mount, but as I mentioned to you earlier, I subsequently designed a Dobsonian mount for it, and the reason for that was that when it was mounted on this, it's a very long telescope, as you can see, and it's very hard for this small mount to be able to hold it steady. As a consequence, when you look through here, the eyepiece, you could easily jiggle it and everything disappears basically when it vibrates like that. And so what you want is a really good solid mount. And unfortunately, because the Newtonian is relatively inexpensive to make and is really a very good telescope for looking at the night sky, they tend to come with relatively inexpensive mounts and tripods designed for the beginner. And that's an unfortunate combination because often there will be a large amount of frustration associated with using this system, and people may not pursue the hobby because of that.